Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, in the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. And joining me, my good friends, on my left, but maybe you're right, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky, Anshe Chesed, New York City. And in the bottom drawer today, Rabbi Barry Chesler of the Solomon Schechter Day School of Langa. Before we begin, I want to give a special shout out to my mother. Today is her 90th birthday. 90th birthday, Diana Malamet, Mazel Tov.
Happy
I'm
birthday.
going to dedicate this Parsha Talk to my mother, okay? Who's 90 today, and we're going to celebrate in Ottawa on Sunday. I'm going to fly up and have a beautiful day with my mother and many friends. So Mazel Tov. And before we begin, just thank you to all the people that are watching us and listening to us and making their commitment to Torah study through us. We I don't want to say, well, we thank you. Let's just say we
We
thank
do
you.
thank you. But you also have to say what special day it is.
Today is Yom Ha'atzmaut. We are celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. We're recording this on Wednesday of the week, April 26th, 2023, the 75th anniversary of Israel. And remarkable. You know, last week we talked about the chanting of the Megillah. I had the opportunity to chant it. I know that Jeremy, you experienced that also. It was very moving, like we said, very, very moving to chant Megillat Ha'atzmaut. But this week, of course, we have a double Parsha, Aharei and Kedoshim, right in the heart of the book of Vayikra, in which we're going to find the heart of the Torah. I'm going to make that claim that what we have in these two parshiot are the heart of the Torah, or certain ideas that really are at the heart of Judaism. Lemashal, for example, take chapter 18, verse 20, which is already towards the end of the first parsha, Aharei Kedoshim. It's a verse that may be known to many people, may not be well known, but it's certainly quoted because it's at the heart of an important concept. Let me quote the verse. Let me state the concept, and let me get you to react to it, or to react to the idea. This is one of the central values in Judaism. The verse is, Ushmartem et chukotai vet mishpatai. You shall keep my laws and my statutes, asher yaseh otam ha'adam v'chai bahem. That a person should do them and live by them, ani Adonai. A very simple verse with a simple proposition. Do the mitzvot, do the chukotai and mishpatai, practice the laws and the statutes, keep them, so that you will live by them, v'chai bahem, ani Adonai. And I'm referring to the concept, at least one concept from that verse, which is the concept of Pikuah nefesh. So I pulled up, I like to read the Torah Tamima as a commentary, and he quotes the passage from Tractate Yoma, Pehei Amud Beit, 95, right? Samach Ayin, sorry, 85, verse side B. Tanya minayin lebikuach nefesh shedoche et Shabbat. How do we know that saving a life suspends Shabbat or sets aside Shabbat? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name, and Rabbi Shmuel said, "Tichtiv ushmartem et chukotai vet mishpatai asher yaseh odam v'chai bahem." He quotes our verse: "You shall live by them, v'lo sheyamut bahem," and not so you should die by them. So an example of pikuach nefesh on Shabbat would be you have to, you have an emergency, you have to transport a person who is in an emergency to the hospital on Shabbat. Normal Shabbat law is you have to refrain from motorized, mechanized transportation. I know we have our own discussions of that in the conservative movement, but certainly within traditional halacha, you're not supposed to. But when life is in danger, suspend all law, go to the hospital. That's what you have to do. And v'chai bahem is the answer to that. I myself have had to do that on more than one occasion, and I consider myself very lenient with regard to this. Once my daughter Nama cut her chin on a Shabbos morning, was bleeding profusely. It wasn't life threatening, but there was something about, you have to understand something, that the priority of taking care of your child is 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 important. If it's going to take you 3 hours to walk to the hospital rather than get in your car, you get in your car and you walk and you go to the hospital. So that I'm stating a lenient position, but maybe it's a chumrah on pikuach nefesh.
Well, that's that we just said is the beautiful thing. Like this is a story that I can't attest to the provenance, but uh, I'll just make up a context or something. That Rav Chaim Brisker, the famous Talmudic scholar of the late 19th, early 20th, the grandfather of Rav Soloveitchik, told somebody to eat on Yom Kippur, and they said to him, "You're being very makil you're being very lenient about Yom Kippur." He said, "Actually, I'm being very strict about Pikuach Nefesh. I'm being insistent about the importance of life saving."
It's not as cut and dried, though, as we sometimes think. So there's a story related to that story about Israel Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, who in the midst of a cholera epidemic, and I think he was in Poland at the time, on Yom Kippur, he insisted that the congregation eat, and he made a bracha on bread and took a sip, because it was important to save the lives of the congregants. So there's a version of this story in one of Levi Ginsburg's books, and he references the story with a footnote saying, "I heard this from my uncle, who's president of the shul." And what is often not told with the Salanter story is that there were plenty of people in the shul, including the lay leadership, who were really upset with Rabbi Salanter because they didn't think it was quite the issue of Pikuach Nefesh that he represented. And so, we understand the concern for a child. I once had to drive my son to the doctor on Yom Kippur, which was very bizarre on a lot of different levels, not the least of which is I didn't make an appearance in shul until Mincha, which is quite out of the ordinary for me on Yom Kippur. It's not always so easy to figure out exactly what the right thing to do is, even when we want to honor the principle of Pikuach Nefesh.
So I think that I don't want to say it's become easier and easier to think this way. I think what's underlying the Pikuach Nefesh, that life supersedes everything, and that's the value, that's the ethical anchor of Judaism, that we understand what the place of ritual is, and we understand that we're living this, a life that's dedicated to the observance of the mitzvot, but the highest mitzvah, the most important, is to be alive.
I want to offer a slightly different take, and of course, no one can disagree with that the highest mitzvah is to be alive. It certainly would make for a very short show if we chose otherwise.
Really.
But my mother used to tell a story about her father, who was a rabbi from the old country, who once came into her room when she was sick and turned on the light. And my mother was quite surprised that she turned on the light on Shabbos, and he said,
But this was on Shabbos?
It was on Shabbos. Yeah, it's an important detail. Get that out there. And he said to my mother, there'll be other Shabbosim. And I think the value of Pikuach Nefesh is not just the value of saving a human life. It's a recognition that our observance of any one Shabbat is not the ultimate. Yes. That we're in this for the long haul, and that we have a pattern of living that sometimes is interrupted on an individual Shabbat, but that doesn't alter the fact that we subscribe to the pattern of living on all the others, right? So, we don't decide, for example, that on this Shabbat, I have to take my child to the hospital. I no longer have to observe Shabbat.
The problem, though, of course, like as you said, taken in one way. First of all, your grandfather's story is an almost direct quotation. Chalel Shabbat achat, desecrate one Shabbat, kidei shetishmor Shabbatot harbe, so you can keep many others. So if it is true that you need an emergency medical intervention, it's a no-brainer. But this now brings us into some interesting questions, because number one, like you could imagine somebody saying, and we all hear varieties of this in different things. Listen, saving life is really the most important thing, and health is really an important thing. So everything healthy becomes a mitzvah, and maybe I can, whatever, buy organic chickens that aren't kosher because that's healthy, that's life-saving. Pikuach nefesh is an emergency situation. And so I think that of course it is true, as Barry was alluding to, and I think that if we are like really expansive on Pikuach nefesh, if everything healthy gets put under the rubric of, well, I'm life-saving now, I think it can diminish the importance of actual, the fabric of religious life, and we don't want that to happen. So Pikuach nefesh and V'chai Bahem and Chalel Shabbat Echad are about, certain emergency settings which set out the limits by which conventional observance, within which conventional observance happens. And I think that's like the proper proportion.
Right. I just, this has been baked into me. I don't know if I told you the story when I was Rosh Hashanah in Machane Raman, Canada. We had a weekend. We used to do Shabbat Bayar, Linat Shabbat. We used to take the whole Eidah out for Shabbat, and so we made beautiful camp, and we got everything prepared for Shabbat. And
you gotta tell people what Lina Bayar means.
Going out, sleeping in the forest for Shabbat. Lina is sleeping, Yar is forest, and it was called the Linat Shabbat, having Shabbat in the forest. And so Friday night, Kabbalat Shabbat, going to sleep, everybody. And one of the campers has an asthma attack, and it was very, very bad. And we called the emergency, and I called the camp because that's what I knew I had to do. And the director said, get in the car with the Rangers and take her to the hospital and come back. Come back. So I remember, in the first year we had our halacha class, and the assignment was to write a tshuva. So I wrote the tshuva on, if you go out to save someone, if you go out for Pikuach nefesh, are you allowed to, return? And I answered that, of course, you are allowed, because and the reasoning was, if you hesitate to save the person because you think you're going to violate Shabbat, you're not doing anybody any favor, right? And the idea is that there should be no impediment to your saving the person, because that's the most important thing. And if the idea that you can't return means that you're not going to go out in the first place, that's going to imperil the life more. Yeah. So and I mentioned that on my rabbinical school interview. How about that? And
they let you in anyway.
They let me in. That was right.
Yes. So it's interesting because
take an extra halacha class.
Exactly. Just to flesh this out one perhaps step further. Obviously our sister religion, Christianity, has a martyrdom thing, and they have a big tradition of martyrs. There's stories about, the ancient church under Rome is about people who were, willing to die and sacrifice their lives, Mesirut Nefesh. And the fact that we are Mesirut Nefesh is giving up your own life. And the fact that we are just a day after Yom HaZikaron in Israel, which is also described as Mesirut Nefesh, as selflessness and being willing to give up your life, even unto the point of death. We in Judaism tend, as this conversation is illustrating, we tend to not really like that. We tend to say that no, Pikuach nefesh is saving life is just really more important than lots of things, but not everything. And the Talmudic tradition regards, three paradigm things as worth dying for. Violating Shabbat is not one of them, right? It's killing another person, it's worshiping idols, and it's sexual sins. And I actually kind of do think that it is important, as Martin Luther King said, if this is a kind of a famous quotation, problematic on its face, but I think at a deep level, it's profound. Martin Luther King said, if you don't have something for which you're willing to die, you're not fit to live. I don't like statements about who's quote unquote fit to live, But I do think that life, with its value, implies that you have certain things that are more important than life itself. Because if not, you will do absolutely anything to stay alive, and that's wrong. You should not kill another person. This is the Talmud's famous example is the one guy, so to speak. There's no guns, but it's person A puts puts a gun to person B's head and says, "Go kill person C, or I'll kill you." Person B is supposed to say, "I don't know if my blood is redder than the other person's, and no, it's not worth my life to kill an innocent person. I should prefer death over that." And I think that chas v'chalila, any of us are ever in the extreme positions of having to make choices like that. And yet I think that the idea of chai bahem, that you should live through the mitzvot and not die by them, has meaning because there is a limit in which it has meaning. It's not absolutely everything.
I think that's an important way to frame it. All right, so why don't we move to Kedoshim, and just we'll put out the first verses of Kedoshim. Daber al kol adat b'nei Yisrael v'amarta alehem Kedoshim to you. Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, "You shall be holy, ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, because I, the Lord your God, am holy." And those loyal listeners and viewers know that this is one of our top three verses in
This is like the Hey Jude of the Bible. This is like, I can't get no satisfaction. This is like Born to Run of the Bible.
This is the mission statement. Be holy, be holy. So our question really is on the whole subject of holy. You can't have the entire people be holy in the sense that the entire people acts as Kohanim, or is it what does it mean in terms of the world? This harkens to an early conversation that we had, which is Israel's role in the world or Israel among itself. What is it, and what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean? What is God saying to Moses here to tell the people when he says to them, "Be holy, Kedoshim to you," right? So I'll offer this interpretation, which is this goes back to before Sinai when God says to Moses, "Vatem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh." You will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That Israel in the world is to act in a way as the Kohen acts in the people of Israel. So it's a nice analogy. As Kohanim are to Israel, Israel is to the world. What do Kohanim do? Kohanim administer and bring, they are the bearers of God's name in the community. They have their sanctified precincts. They do their rituals. They enable the people to perform and to live their holy life in all these spheres, and thus Israel, by bringing something of godliness to the world, acts in a priestly manner to the world. They are the Mamlechet Kohanim. And Kedoshim to you means be separate, be distinct, and live a way of life that enables God to be in the world. So your reactions to that, if you have.
So it obviously makes a great deal of sense the way that you stated, Elliot, because it's very difficult to figure out what it would mean for everyone to actually be a priest in Israel. That we can't really have a society where everyone is a priest. And one of the things that we sometimes overlook is that the dimension of holiness is always a small subset of a greater phenomenon. So we could have a holy people as a minority amongst the majority. We could have a holy city in the country. We could have a holy temple amidst other buildings in that city. And we could have a Kodesh HaKodeshim, which is actually the smallest part of the temple in relationship to the rest of the temple. And I think in some way, perhaps this is a charge to be a significant minority. That the way that you're not looking to proselytize, as it were, but to illustrate by example how to live a life in the shadow or in the dimension of the divine.
So what you're saying is that in a way, this is a validation of Israel's size as a small people. It's a validation of Israel as in its exceptionality and its uniqueness. And it's a validation in the sense that Israel's not going out to convert the world and make everyone Jewish. I mean, that's you need Jews in the world for the sake of the world. In other words,
Right.
in your schematic drawing of the concentric circles of holiness, you're saying that holiness depends on things outside of this. So that's the necessity of the rest of the world.
Right. So it requires non-Jews as well.
Yes.
So the goal is not for everyone in the world to become Jewish, but rather for Jews to live in harmony with the non-Jews amongst them.
And for non-Jews to live in harmony with Jews.
Halavai.
Halavai.
That would be good.
You know,
I want to just add,
go ahead.
That these two parshiot, I mean, not so much the Aharei at the beginning with the Yom Kippur ritual, but the commandment of the people to not eat, forbidden foods, to have a certain set of sexual practices, and we in our modern time are not going to feel these exact same way with the details of the precise, or at least many. As one of my members who was she worked with victims of human trafficking. She said, because of the prohibitions on homosexuality in these parshiot, many people today just really have a difficulty with the parshiot, and we say, I can't read these. She said that you have to understand that the incest prohibitions and the exploitation prohibitions, the victims of sexual trafficking, human trafficking that she encounters, everyone has experienced these exploitations. The homosexuality one is going to be difficult sailing for us, but for everyone else, for these other ones, they're like important to understand the family relationships and fidelity relationships and exploitation like that, are a serious problem. And so the command that in your sexual relationships, in your eating relationships, and then in Parshat Kedoshim, in a range of ethical interpersonal relationships, you can be holy. Now, in the next week's parsha, in Emor, which is directly addressed to the priestly class. Sorry, I can't do this right now. Directly addressed to the priestly class. It says, Kedoshim yihiyu leElohehem v'lo yechalu shem Elohehem. The priests will be holy to their God, and they will not profane the name of their God. Ki et Ishei Adonai lechem Elohehem hem makribim v'hayu kodesh. They offer the Lord's, gifts by fire. They, so to speak, offer the food of their God, and so they must be holy. In those parts of Leviticus, that's why we call it Leviticus, it's about the Levitical actions, the Levitical priests, and there's a kind of a holiness that comes to their ritual status. These parshiot are saying, in a very, profoundly democratic way, this applies to everybody. This applies to, sanctity is not what the official functionaries do in the temple. Sanctity is the way you treat the deaf and the blind. Sanctity is the way you treat, other people, that you don't hate other people in your heart, that you learn to, you learn to love other people as yourself. And so I would say that in addition to the dimensions about this, which relates to Israel and other nations, I think that these portions locate holiness, as it were. There's a kind of nuance or harmonic on the most of Leviticus that says temples are holy, rituals are holy, sacrifices are holy, ritual purity and impurity, that's a dimension of holiness. And this part says the way we live together with each other in love and kindness, and not in viciousness and not in exploitation. That's the holiness.
So I want to just get one more voice from the parsha here, which speaks to, I think, one of the tensions here, because you mentioned, of course, that the ethical rules that are found in chapter 19, chapter 20, these are, in a way, they're for everyone. They're democratic in the sense that everyone can aspire to them and everyone should live by them, and that's what creates a holy people. And then you get a verse like this in chapter 20, which is chapter 20, verse 25. I'm sorry, chapter 20, verse 24. Vatem tirshu. I'll say to you, Atem tirshu et admatam. You will inherit your land. Vani etnena lachem lareshet ota. I give it to you to dwell in it, to inherit it. Eretz avat chalav v'dvash, a land of flowing milk and honey. Ani Adonai Elohechem. I am the Lord your God. Asher hivdalti etchem min ha'amim, who has separated you from the nations. So I focus on this because it seems.
Read the next verse too, though, because it's important.
V'ivdaltem et bein behema torah latmeima, and you shall distinguish, separate from the pure animal to the impure animal, bein ha'of hatameh latahor, from an impure bird to a pure bird, v'lo teshakzu et nafshotechem b'meima uva'of, and you shouldn't make your squander your souls with these creatures.
You make yourself gross, yeah.
Gross, okay, but I'm
So
focused.
the eating and the uniqueness are tied.
Okay, fine, but it's not only about eating; it's about being different. It's about being distinguished. The only reason I mention is because my ear is so tuned to the phrase "Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher Hotzeiti etchem Eretz Yitzrayim." I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. There's 5 times that phrase occurs in the Torah, and there's only once that it occurs here. I am the Lord that distinguishes you. And so it occurs to me to offer this following idea, which is, it seems that the idea of God as Redeemer is a much more important idea, or a much more vocalized idea in the Torah than God as differentiator. And that what we have in Kedoshim and what we have in Vayikra is a very, very kind of specific view of a very specific worldview of priests that see the world in distinct categories, right? Kodesh, Chol, Tahor, Tameh, Chayim, Mavet, holy, profane, pure, impure, life, death. And it ought to take us back to creation, which is Or, Choshech, light and darkness, Yom, Laila, day and night, and all the other categories in which God is acting as Havdalah. And of course, we invoke this idea every Saturday night when we recite Havdalah, Hamavdil ben Kodesh Lechol. God, you separate from holiness and profane. Ben Kodesh Lechol ben Yom HaShvi l'Sheish Yimei HaMaseh, the 7th day, the 6th, ben Yisrael Amim, Israel and the nations. So this notion of being distinct and differentiated is here. We have our own tension with this, because yes, we are distinct. Yes, we are like everybody else. And so it's it's not the dominant voice, but it is a voice. And I want you to react to that if you have some.
So what I would suggest, first of all, is that redemption is understood ultimately, I think, to be a process and not an event. So the event that we link redemption to is God taking us out of Egypt. And in particular, the crossing of the Sea of Reeds is the paradigm of redemption. But redemption does not exist for itself, right? So the Exodus from Egypt in the original story in Shemot was in order to bring us into the land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey. And in the context of our Parasha, the purpose of redemption is to enable us to distinguish ourselves from other people. We need to live with them and live amidst them, but we also have to be separate from them. We can't be like them totally, because then we would give up our own identity. And, I'm reminded that for most of us, our core identity is somehow linked to the families that we grew up in. And there is no national family or international family where everyone is one. We are little distinct elements in the midst of a larger group. And I think that one of the things that we prize is that distinct identity, whether it's in our family of origin or family of choice, the one that we perhaps marry into and raise our children, or in the nation that we come to embrace as well.
I think obviously there's no way to. This is almost self-evident. We have always been a very small people. We have always lived among much, much, much larger, more powerful peoples, and it's not as the book of Deuteronomy says. It's not because you're the biggest people, because in fact you aren't the smallest. That's why I love you because of your smallness, and so a huge, huge, huge part of Jewish social, instinct, I think, has been we have got to be distinct, we have got to be different, because if we don't, we will just get completely swamped. And so maintaining that difference is highly important, and I do think it is highly important. And um, and I think that like many things, in the right proportion, that's incredibly salutary. In the wrong proportion, it's not so healthy. It can produce bigoted and very negative attitudes towards the word goy in the Bible means a nation. And over the time in Jewish history, it comes to mean a not nice thing to say about a non-Jewish individual. That happened, right? And I think that I want to have a strong, separate, bounded identity. Ethnicity means I am this thing, I am not that other thing, and you are that other thing, and you are not this thing. And I certainly favor a kind of an endogamy norm. I hope that Jews marry Jews and raise Jewish families, and all that is true. And I hope that we don't go overboard and think that we're better than other people and that we're the chosen, and somehow and the other people are inferior. And I think that's its own struggle.
So let's bring it back in the minute or two that we have remaining to open up the hours long conversation, which is, this is part of the debate that's going on in Israel, which is, what does it mean to be a Jewish state, and what does is it just a state for Jews, or is it a Jewish state, and does it mean that we should be like every other, that Israel should be like every other state, or does it mean that there's something unique or aspirational to the Jewishness of the state? Now, of course, we'll all get tangled up in can a Jewish state be a democracy? It's a Jewish state and a democratic state, and that's a very, very important and urgent debate right now. But are we ever going to be? Is it ever possible for Israel to be normal, to be like everybody else, or is it ever possible is it always going to be separate?
This is really, obviously, as you said, this is at the very, very heart of the conversation. Like we have had that part of Zionist discourse that we want to be a nation like all the other nations, and isn't it going to be great when a Jewish cop arrests a Jewish gangster or something like that? And I suppose after everything that we've experienced in the different iterations of Jewish history, there is something special about being like all the other nations in that respect, with all of our any society's strengths and flaws. But in the end, I really am only interested. I think it only should capture our hearts, capture our passion, capture our most important moral commitments. If it is a country that is worthy of Jewish tradition and Jewish history.
So before we start, I showed you this pun. Herzl wrote the book Alt Neuland, which is old new land. And there's an educator named Derek Perlman who calls it the Al Tanai land, that it's a land that is on condition. And that the Torah really prescribes for us, the conditional attachment to the land. And here we have it in clear, in other places in the book of Vayikra. You live by the rules, by the laws, and the land will embrace you. But if you don't live by the rules, and you violate the rules of the land will spit you out. The land will vomit you out.
Parasha Shavua. That's 1828.
Lo taki.
Lo taki haaretz etchem b'ta'amachem ota. The land will vomit you out if you defile it.
Yeah, very powerful imagery here, because there's a sense of repulsion. So it means that the obligation is to be somewhat distinct, and to live a moral life, and to live an ethical life, and to live a holy life. Those are the conditions that you live in the land. Of course, that's speaking in antiquity. we could translate that to modernity also, that there's a certain moral posture that has to be cultivated in the land, and that Israel, as the Jewish people, needs to be, in a sense, the Kohen to the world, or the Or Lagoyim, whatever metaphor you want to choose. Barry, you want to?
So what I would suggest is that we judge countries, I think, by how well they live up to their values. I don't know that any country is really normal. I mean, we're used to thinking of the United States, at least for those of us who were born here, as being normal because that's where we were born. But are we normal compared with England or with France or other Western democracies?
Canada.
Or Canada, the northern democracy?
Canada is
Oh,
normal.
Canada.
Canada is normal.
So what I think is important for us as Jews is that we live up to our Jewish values.
Indeed.
And that is the norm that would make us normal.
Oh, but
Not
you know,
being
this
like
is,
the other people, it's adhering to the norm of that our people have chosen over time.
and this is why now, and now I'm sorry for being, totally 2023 about this. That is why the arguments that are going on in the state of Israel about what it is that constitutes our Jewish values are so significant, because we have the not insignificant sector of society that thinks that Judaism, is ultra nationalist and has to kick out, everybody else, and can be quite violent. And I think these things are repugnant, and they are not without, every heretic has their own proof text. They're psukim, they're marot,
Absolutely.
that the Kahanists can quote. So that's why it is so important that we actually have an argument about what it is that constitutes Jewish values. And it's not, and I'm not saying, that it's the left wing of the Democratic Party and everybody has to vote like an American in a blue state, something like that. But to a real engagement with, not everything that is the flavor of the month for, quote unquote progressive politics is ipso facto Jewish values. But we are going to have to make an argument that is in fact rooted in Jewish texts and sources and ideas about what those values are, such that we should live up to them. Because you got those other guys over there saying that Jewish values are like ahavat haaretz, kibush haaretz, conquering the land, settling the land is the most important thing in the world. So that's the Jewish values. We got to live up to the Jewish values and build Jewish settlements in every inch of the land. That's not exactly where I'm coming down.
Also, well, we started the conversation. We're never going to end the conversation, that's for sure. But we got to come to an end now, and we hope that people watching and listening to us will have stuff to talk about, because there's just no shortage of things to talk about from this parsha. And as usual, we thank you for watching. We thank you for listening. We thank you for spending the time with us. We want to wish everybody a beautiful Shabbat again, Chag Sameach, and we're keeping keeping the conversation going. We'll join us next week on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Thanks, guys.